Thank you for joining us for the Hillel College Fair and our special session on anti-Semitism on campus, hearing from student leaders about their personal experiences addressing anti-Semitism on college campuses today. I'm Matt Berger, Hill International's Vice President for Strategic Action Programs and Communications, and I want to thank all of you for joining us this evening. We've got three great students here to share their stories. I'm going to ask each of them to start by introducing themselves, telling us a little bit about who they are and where they're from, and how anti-Semitism has played a role in their college experience, and perhaps most importantly, how they've addressed it and what they've done. So let me start the conversation with our first student, Bianca. Bianca.
Hi, everyone. My name is Bianca. I am a fourth-year student at UC San Diego. I'm originally from Las Vegas, Nevada, if you've heard of that. Some things that I do on campus, I'm really involved with Israel advocacy and Israel celebration and education. And I think it's been the main way that I've experienced anti-Semitism. I think academically and socially, a lot of the anti-Semitism I've faced has been through the facade of anti-Zionism, and I've experienced it both intersectionally and blatantly. And then just this past month, it was 2 months ago, around Purim, I actually passed the IRA definition on my campus. So I was able to pass a resolution through my student government and our graduate and professional student governments that acknowledged, defined, and accurately condemned anti-Semitism as it exists at UC San Diego, to set a precedent for, God forbid, more anti-Semitism that's to come. But if there is, it will be accurately condemned. So that's a bit of what I've done on campus.
Thanks, Bianca. Our next student is Julia Jassy. Julia.
Hi, my name is Julia Jassy. I'm a second-year student at the University of Chicago, and I'm super involved with Jewish life on and off campus. A bit about where I come from. I'm originally from Long Island, New York, which is an area with a lot of Jewish people, but I'd argue the culture is oftentimes watered down. So growing up, saying that you're Jewish is like saying that you play soccer. It's something that you kind of say and then no one really asks you about. So my experience growing up, although I didn't really fully kind of explore my Jewish identity, there was never really much pushback against any part of it. So my family comes from pretty different backgrounds. My father's family is Ashkenazi, so they're from Poland, and they're from Romania and from Russia, whereas my mother's family is Sephardi, so they're from Spain and Iraq and Yemen. And so because of that, I have two kind of different pieces of my identity that I've come to really explore in college, but also I've had a lot more pushback because my family is Israeli. So I had a similar experience to Bianca, where a lot of the time the anti-Semitism that I've faced has been because my family is Israeli. And that was never something I really had to contend with until I came to college, because it was never something that was different really about me until I came to school. And I think that this is an experience that lots of Jewish people are facing, because idea of what Jewish identity means oftentimes not fully explored. And so since then, I've become a part of a project called Jewish on Campus, which is now a nonprofit organization. We have social media, we do things off social media too. And that project is an organization run entirely by Jewish students, myself included, from schools all over the world, where we've come together with a community of now almost 28,000 people from around the world as well, who are working together to both bring awareness to what anti-Semitism is and to combat anti-Semitism in the process. That's been a super transformative experience for me. It's helped me kind of to fully root myself in my Jewish identity and to see it as something that makes me very much proud of where I come from. And I'm sure I'll speak more to that later on in the panel. Thank you again for having me.
Thank you. And our final panelist today is Tabo Viramontes from the University of Texas, San Antonio. Tavo, tell us a little bit about yourself.
So hi everyone, my name is Tabo Viramontes. I'm originally from Guadalajara, Jalisco, Mexico, but 7 years ago I moved to the United States, where I currently reside on San Antonio, Texas for the past 7 years. Right now I'm a second-year student at the University of Texas in San Antonio, where I'm studying civil engineering, and I'm really involved in my campus, in the community. Right now I'm the current president for Octavio, and we're involved with the multicultural office in the school and trying to be very active in our community. These past few months, I've been privileged to be the president for our Hillel and work really closely with our student coordinator on trying to resolve any problems that come up regarding anti-Semitism. We had a couple of 3 or 4 incidents this past year, and I have been able to have the opportunity to be able to coordinate with administration and work closely with the current administration and our community to be able to face and combat those problems together as a community, as one, because I think we have found that for us to be able to face these problems is key for us to be partners with our administration and community too, and have clear communication with our students, with our parents, and with everyone in our community. So that's a little bit of the experience I have with anti-Semitism. Yeah, and thank you for having me here.
Thank you. Thank you all. Let me take a second and drill down a little bit on each of your stories and the experiences that you had. Bianca, let me start with you. Why don't tell us a little bit about what led you to want to push for a definition of anti-Semitism on your campus, and you talked about the IRA definition of anti-Semitism. And just for those of you in our audience who don't know, that's the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance's definition. It was created several years ago, and it's been widely adopted by countries and by organizations. Tell us a little bit about what was the impetus for seeking that, and what was the response you received?
So in terms of my own Jewish background, I have a Persian Jewish background. So both of my parents are Iranian refugees from the revolution in '79. And coming to campus, I came from a small Jewish day school in Vegas, and I was super excited to meet all these Persian people and really, engage with that part of my identity. And I noticed in a lot of the circles, my Jewish identity, in particular my Zionist identity, was one that became conditional to participating in the other aspects of my identity. So I couldn't be fully Persian if I was Zionist. I couldn't be fully involved in women's circles if I was Zionist or if I was Jewish. And I saw this as a recurring issue, and it kind of proved to me that my Jewish identity probably meant that my Jewish identity was the strongest if all my other identities couldn't accept that one identity. So it kind of made me clench to it stronger and stronger. And I started holding all these different fellowships that really honed in on be close with your student government. And I went on Fact Finders. So I got to visit Israel and the Palestinian territories, and I made these really meaningful connections. And then after I finished my presidency in Tritons for Israel in the past year, I was like, okay, let's end off our college experience with something that'll actually make a difference on the campus-wide. And so it was about 2.5 months of just meeting with people nonstop, just 15-minute meetings with sororities and fraternities and professors and departments. And there were people that said, no, we're not interested, or we don't think we can have a say in this. But I think adopting the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance's working definition of anti-Semitism would result in the beginning of this eradication that comes with the stigma that comes with the UC. I think I myself growing up was kind of not told to go to a UC, don't go to UC, UCs are anti-Semitic, UCs have BDS. And I think I've gained a lot from going to a UC school. And I think my Jewish identity has definitely been challenged from a UC school. But I think putting
just so we're clear, UC means University of California. Just so everybody knows. Yeah.
My lingo, I get a little
That's okay.
But being in a University of California, I think within the Jewish community, there's very much a well-known stigma that it's not the most comfortable place to be Jewish or to be Israeli or to be Zionist. And I felt that even in circles that I did feel very strongly with those identities, I still wasn't welcome because of that identity. And I didn't want any future generations or future students to ever feel that they couldn't pursue such a great education that a UC could provide just because of that identity. So I felt that pursuing the IRA definition and making those relationships was the first step into really eradicating anti-Semitism as it exists on our campus.
Thank you. And before I turn next to Julia and another UC, University of Chicago, I do want to say that if you have any questions for our panelists, please send a message to questions@Tina Malka. It's one of the names of one of our people in the chat, and you can get questions, send your questions to her, and she will share them with me. So Julia, let me turn to you, because you took a very different approach. You decided to launch a social media and a really a public awareness campaign around anti-Semitism on campus. Tell me more and tell us more about the impetus for that and how that's been received.
Yeah, of course. So Jewish on Campus started with a group of 6 students, myself included, who were during the pandemic, spending more time online on social media. And with that, seeing more of the anti-Semitism that not just ourselves were facing, but that students around the country are facing as well. So it began with a conversation with a group of 6 of us who decided that this was a project we wanted to put together with no expectation. We thought this would just be, a couple of posts on social media. Very quickly, we're getting a couple of thousands of people responding per day. And now we're at a platform of almost 28,000, but we've kind of taken it beyond just social media now. We're a nonprofit organization who are working toward not just bringing awareness to, but also now combating it. So we work with students all over the country every single day. I probably spend more time in meetings than I do in class at this point, but it's definitely worth it. But part of that, I think it's had kind of 2 impacts since then. One, I think the conversation, at least in my observance, has become a little bit more normalized around talking about anti-Semitism. I think it's kind of been this word that we've seen thrown around since we were kids, like certain schools are anti-Semitic, just like Bianca had mentioned. Be careful of going here, be careful of doing that. But I think that there wasn't really an understanding of what anti-Semitism is, because it's a nebulous kind of hatred. It's changed throughout lots of generations, but there's this historical rooting in students being a call for change. I think a great example of that is like the United Struggle for Soviet Jews, which happened back when the USSR was having tremendous amount of anti-Semitism, where there were 250,000 people who marched on Washington in solidarity with Soviet Jews. There's a strong historical precedence for student activism. And that's something that we're all really inspired by. And now we're a group of 16 students who do this every single day. And I think that there's also been a strengthening in our own Jewish identities. And I think Jewish identities are people who kind of have been seeing the work that we've done, I should hope, because I think that, kind of like Bianca had mentioned, when you see that this is the thing you're getting backlash for, it makes you understand and appreciate how much of value it is to you. If you're willing to endure that, you realize it's something really strong to hold on to. And I think we've all kind of internalized that for stronger.
That's great. Tavo, let me turn to you, because I know you actually spoke to your university's administration and campus leaders about anti-Semitism on campus and issues that were concerning to you. Tell us a little bit about that experience and what you learned from it.
So this happened like about a month ago during Black History Month, where UTSA decided to invite Dr. Angela Davis to come to speak our campus. For those who don't know, Dr. Angela Davis is a big activist of the civil rights movement, but at the same time, is a big supporter of the BDS movement, with the history of making hurtful comments to our Jewish community and Israel. So we were really concerned about what this meant for our community. For me, it was important to speak up not only as a Jewish Latino, but as a Jew of color, as this did not only affect myself and my identity, but as well as other students like me. As our San Antonio community is a really diverse community, we have a lot of intersectionality, from Hispanics to Jewish of color. So we have a lot of intersectionality. So when bringing a speaker to campus with a history of anti-Semitic statements, it made us feel like the Jewish community was not being welcome in the space of hiding racial justice. So with this, we decided to act and collaborate closely with our school administration to move forward to create stronger ties and an inclusive environment at our campus where intersectionality was being taken into consideration. So we sat down with school administration, we had a couple meetings, and we basically told them our concerns. And we were very grateful because they listened, and we started working with them. One of the things that we started working is bringing more awareness to our campus. We started this by adding the IHRA anti-Semitic definition to our Inclusive and Excellence website. We also started taking more part of the conversation on when speakers are coming to campus and how to move forward using our Hillel resources to make sure that those speakers are mindful of all the different communities in our school. Last but not least, we continue to create stronger ties with our administration to make sure that we're in communication, that we're working together, and that when we're bringing speakers or we're doing activities, we're being mindful of all the different communities. So I think, like I said, communication was key during this process, making sure that we're voicing our concerns, that we're, because at the end, we don't want to protest. Our goal is to educate people, and we want to be mindful of everyone around. So I think for us, having that connection with our administration has been really helpful, and it's been something that's been key when fighting these anti-Semitic incidents.
Thank you. Let me ask all of you, but let me start with Julia, because you're talking to students from a lot of different campuses as part of your work at Jewish on Campus. How big a problem is anti-Semitism on college campuses? We have a lot of high school students, a lot of parents of high school students in the audience. How big of a problem is this? Is this something where every Jewish student on campus today is going to face this and have to deal with it, or does it feel more isolated and individual?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that this question entirely depends. The last thing I want to do on this panel, or the last thing I want anyone to walk away with, is to be scared to go to college, because college is a wonderful experience. I love the University of Chicago. In my 2 years here, I've had an incredible time. I'm excited to keep being a student here. I'm lucky to go here, and I don't want the message to be afraid. I've read at this point over 1,000 submissions of anti-Semitism from people around the country. There is a genuine problem of anti-Semitism, and how you choose to combat that is your own decision. If your hope for college, if your hope for being a Jewish student in college is to go to your Hillel, to have a space to be a Jewish student, to participate for Jewish holidays, for Shabbat dinners, to get to know your rabbi, that's incredible. You don't ever have to be the person who is actively, trying to pass ira or trying to condemn anti-Semitism, because that's a genuine toll that it might have on your experience. That's not what you want out of it. And I don't think that anyone should ever feel like they owe the emotional weight that takes if they don't feel like that's what they want out of college, because you very easily could have an incredible college experience as a Jewish student at any school. Some schools might have more anti-Semitic incidences than others, and that's absolutely a fact. But I have friends who go to schools with some of the higher number of anti-Semitic incidences. I have Jewish friends at NYU and Tufts, which are two of the schools with the highest reports that we've gotten so far. And they love their college experience. They despise the anti-Semitism they face, but they love being a student in college. And I think that part of the power that we give to anti-Semitism is letting it control our lives. And I'm guilty of that myself. I mean, just by nature of doing this work, there are times when it feels like it takes a tremendous toll on me. And I think it takes a tremendous toll on all of us. But I think the best thing we can do to resist that, the best thing we can do to combat anti-Semitism is to be, even if out of spite, a very strong and confident and proud Jewish person, because just being a Jewish person in the world is just this incredible act of resilience. Think about everything that we've been through as people. And it's because of people who decide that they're not going to be pushed out of the spaces that they want to be in, because they're still part of their identity. So I would just urge every Jewish student to go into school and understand that every time you face anti-Semitism, that's just another reason to remind you, you know what? I'm proud of being a Jew, and I'm not going to let that take away, because what they would like for me to do is just remove myself from this space. I'm going to go to college. I'm going to be a strong Jewish person. And I think that's kind of the piece I hope students will take away from this. So to answer your question, I think it's a real problem, and every student and parent should be aware of it. And if it happens to you, please report it to your school, report it to Jewish on Campus, report it to all the obvious kind of resources, which I'm happy to share with you guys. But also don't let it stop you from continuing to be a happy college student as well.
It's a great message. Bianca, Tabo, anything to add on that? What are your perspectives of how big a problem you see this being on campus?
Yeah, I'd love to add on to that. I think Julia said it impeccably, so it's hard to add to what she's saying. But I think what I've noticed a lot is that this Jewish identity has been something that I felt that I had to always defend, that it was something to defend, that I seldom remembered, oh, wait, I can celebrate this too. Oh, this is something to be happy about as well. And because it was always made to be something so controversial and something that I honestly went onto campus thinking it was something to be afraid to show, I didn't take the time to be like, oh, yes, let's just be happy to be Jewish. And that was something I had grown up doing. And I don't know why the second I walked onto a college campus, I thought that had to change, and it didn't. And I totally agree with what Julia's saying. Going to Shabbat dinner every week was just such a breath of fresh air. It became like a relaxation from academics, from stress, from social stress, from anti-Semitism, whatever it was. And that was just being Jewish. And it also reminded me that the anti-Semitism that we do face is a muted epidemic of its own. It's something that's existed on college campuses for some time, but continuing to victimize ourselves as Jews and as the future generation of this community is not beneficial to us or the advocacy that we try to do. So by celebrating ourselves and by continuing to be empowered and sharing our stories, but going to college. And my parents were always like, don't involve yourself in BDS, like put your head down, don't tell people you're Jewish, like just get your degree and leave. And I realized that, yes, okay, maybe that was just like worried Jewish mother syndrome, but it's also us continuing to celebrate and just be successful and power through the identity as a celebration, not always as a defense strategy. It is celebration of its own as well. So I just wanted to add that as well. Thank you.
That's great. Let me ask all of you, how has Hillel and other Jewish community resources supported you during these experiences? What type of support have you gotten from either Hillel professionals or other student leaders in the Jewish community? And what type of support have you received from your university? Anybody? Tabo.
So I'll say a little bit. So San Antonio is really, oh, sorry, my Spanish, sorry. Fortunate, that's the word I'm looking for. San Antonio is really fortunate of having an amazing student life coordinator, Natalie Steiner. She's been there for us. She's been going the extra mile to always provide us with the resources and to be there for us, even during this pandemic time. She was always there for students, reaching out and making sure that we're having events, that we were, that if we had any problems, she was there for us. And aside from all that, not only with our administration, that we have worked closely together with them, our administration has supported us along the way. Every time there's something comes up, they're always there for us. They're open to listen to us, and they're always working with us to solve any problems that we may face. Aside from that, internationals has always also helped us. Recently, with the incident with Angela Davis, we have people help us write a letter for administration and give us different resources to solve any problems. So Hillel, both locally and internationally, has been there for us at every point of the way. And not only for our community, but also to me, it has provided me so many opportunities to grow as a person, as a leader, providing me with different opportunities to be part of cohorts and of different experience that have helped me grow into the person I am today. So that's something I'm really grateful. And it's something that I'm really grateful for Hillel. And it's something that I see that a lot of students are enjoying, all those opportunities that provides for us. Yeah.
Let me ask you a little bit about your Jewish identity. How strong was your Jewish identity before coming to college? How has it changed during your time at college, and what is factored into that? And where does Zionism and support for Israel play into your Jewish identity?
I'd love to answer that question.
Go ahead.
I think I grew up, like I mentioned, in a very strong, like, Persian Jewish household, very traditional in terms of our observance. And I often accredit Israel for the reason that I'm alive today. As dramatic as that sounds, no other country offered my mom refuge when she was running away from Iran except for Israel. So I always looked at it that way. I always looked at it as a very emotional relationship. But the community I grew up in Vegas was a Zionist bubble. I never encountered any sort of anti-Semitism, small Jewish day school, like live, love Israel all the time. And I wanted to go to a school that had anti-Semitism and that had some sort of contradiction to what I was brought up to believe, so I could really see how strong those beliefs were. And UC San Diego was the perfect fit, that I had the strong Jewish community I needed, as well as these antitheses, let's use that word, I guess, to what I thought I believed so strongly. And I think my Zionist identity has gone through a lot of challenges, especially traveling to Israel and the Palestinian territories with my school and with UCSD Hillel. I really grappled with it, and I really struggled with very difficult conversations and talking about Israel as something that wasn't just personal to me and wasn't just emotional to, oh, I love Israel, it's my homeland, like it's larger than that. It's definitely gotten stronger. I think my Zionism and my Jewish identity has a lot more substance after being on campus. I saw there was a question in the chat about professors and academic incidents of anti-Semitism, and I would say that those were probably some of the hardest instances of anti-Semitism that I faced. And I definitely feel like, if anything, it made me more motivated. It provided more of a push and motivation to be passionate about my Jewish identity. So I would say that going to college, having something that was supposedly contradictory to my identity only made it that much stronger. And I'm very happy that I'm, God willing, graduating at the end of this quarter. And I'm excited to go off and hopefully go to medical school in Israel and continue this relationship that I have fostered thus far.
Julia, what about you?
Yeah, I want to echo a similar sentiment to what Bianca had said, kind of all around. First of all, kind of getting into my family's background. My family were all Israeli refugees on my mom's side. They were from Spain and Iraq and Yemen, places that had expulsions of Jews, and they had nowhere else to go. My family also, I credit us being alive to Israel existing. We wouldn't have had anywhere else to go if it weren't for that. So I've always viewed growing up Zionism very similarly to the way that that Bianca had mentioned it as well, where Zionism is the reason why I'm alive, and this connection to it is really emotionally driven. And my first year of college, I realized that I didn't know how to defend it other than that. I knew how to say my family's from there. I knew how to say I'm alive because of it. I didn't know how to say the substantive arguments around it. And it took grappling with a lot of anti-Semitism coming from lots of places, coming from peers, coming from professors, coming from all over social media. I think for me to realize that I had a lot of learning to do. And I think that has been a really empowering journey for like myself, and I'm sure lots of other students as well, to read a book or to listen to a podcast, and to kind of have more gravity to why you believe what you believe, to understand like more of the history of our people. I think in that capacity is really strong. But I think that it's also really important when we're having conversations about Zionism in academic settings to have a spotlight on the voices of students who are most impacted. And I think that a lot of the time that's what's lost. There are lots of stories that I'm sure like all of us can tell. My great-great-grandfather walked from Yemen to Egypt to get to Jerusalem because that was where he could survive with his family. There are all of these stories, and I think that those need to be documented and preserved. So someday when it doesn't seem like there was a world where Jews didn't have a homeland, we can be able to share these experiences and continue to understand the gravity of our connection to the state.
And Tabo, what about you? How has your Jewish identity and your connection to Israel changed during your college experience?
So, like I mentioned before, I grew up in Guadalajara, Jalisco, Mexico. And 8 years I moved to San Antonio, Texas, where the main reasons for this change was to be part of a stronger Jewish community, where I could live a more observant Jewish life and grow more as a person. So this change was definitely a major point of my life. Learning a new language, adopting to a new culture were some of the challenges that I faced. And I felt like I grew a lot between that change and coming to college. Before coming to college, I really got connected to my Jewish identity. But I didn't really connect to Israel. Israel was, it was part of my identity, but I really didn't connect. I had planned to go to Israel before going to college, but it was like, okay, I want to go visit, but there was not much into that. And coming as a freshman at UTSA, I seek to find a community to not just be involved, where I could help to enhance and enrich my campus. And I found this community in Hillel. And quickly I was given the opportunity and the privilege to apply for a leadership position. And I decided to go for the Israel programming chair. And since then, I started to learn about Israel. I got really passionate about it. And since then, my love and attachment for Israel has just grown. To me, Israel symbolizes not only the place that unites all Jews, but it's a symbol that represents our success and survival through history. And since then, I have worked closely with our student life coordinator and our campus to create more advocacy for Israel, to create more programs that educate our students about Israel. Because really, like as I mentioned before, San Antonio is a small Jewish community, but it's a strong and united and diverse community. And something that we want to bring is more advocacy about an awareness of Israel, to educate our students, not only our Jewish students, but also our community, wider San Antonio community about Israel. So that's something I'm passionate about and I'm trying to learn more about, keep growing that aspect and help others understand about Israel and learn about Israel.
That's great. I appreciate that. I want to go back to something, Bianca, you talked briefly about, which was about your Persian identity and how you felt uncomfortable at times in those spaces as a Jewish student. And Tavo, I know as a Jew of color, this has been something that you've experienced as well. But Bianca, let's start with you. Talk a little bit about when Jewish students enter those other spaces on campus, how they're perceived. Is there anti-Semitism in those spaces? And have you experienced that, and what have you done to address it?
Yeah, so I think most blatantly there were things that had to do with Israel. It was very much my first day of class. It was my first class of undergrad ever. I walked in that morning and I was the only Jew in the class. And our professor asked us in Farsi, it was my Farsi class, to introduce ourselves and what other languages we spoke. So I said I spoke Farsi growing up, I speak Hebrew now. And later in the class, we had to do presentations on something in Iran. And the professor, oh, she was great, very progressive. She was with it, she was fine. But there were others in the class that were very adamant about using derogatory words for Jews that are comparable to what we have in the States of the N-word. And there were students in the class that were using this word very blatantly and freely with no sort of hesitation or concern. And I was really uncomfortable. And my professor was with it enough to condemn it on the spot and humiliate the student so it wouldn't be done again. But it was something that was so embedded in the culture that it wasn't even thought about twice. When there were requests to reschedule Persian New Year events that were on Shabbat, they said, well, you pick your identity, one or the other, which is like, what's more important to you? So like there were countless instances that made us feel, okay, yeah, you're Persian, like you speak Farsi, like you know this, but you're not. And it was this constant othering and othering and othering, and it happened in other like political situations where there were activism and demonstrations on campus that so many of our community members wanted to participate in and enjoy. But when talks of Israel came up, they're like, why are you here? Like, this isn't your place. What are you doing here? I don't understand why you would support this if you support that. And so there's this constant dichotomization, and it's something that unfortunately I experienced. It's something as my Persian identity that I hold so closely and so homely that I didn't expect to have to choose between being Persian and being Jewish. I thought I could be both, and I can. Like, I did decide that I could decide what my own identity is, but I think anti-Semitism is, like I mentioned, such a muted pandemic. It's something that is so pushed to the side, so ignored, and it's something that goes hand in hand with so many other forms of discrimination. It is so intersectional. And I remember we had an event with Ashagar Araro, who's an incredible speaker that speaks on, that she speaks on a lot of her experience as an Ethiopian Israeli Jewish woman. And people ask her all the time, do you identify more as Black or as a woman or as Israeli and as Zionist? And I always struggle with that. Like, am I Persian Jewish, or am I Jewish Persian? Or am I just American? Like, what am I? And then she's like, why do you have to choose? Like, you are what you are. You're Persian Jewish, you're Jewish Persian. It's like your identity, you don't have to choose. I don't know if this answers your question. I got really passionate and kind of went on a tangent, but that's
not a tangent. I think it's a really great message, and really speaks to what so many Jewish students are experiencing right now, whereas they want to be part of the Jewish community, but they also want to be part of other communities on campus. And Tavo, let me turn to you, because obviously you've had this issue as well as a Jew of color. Is that something where you felt a conflict between being part of the Hispanic community on campus and being part of the Jewish community?
So yeah, like definitely that's been something like it's been difficult to, it's been a path that I had to go through. when I say like, oh, I'm Hispanic, and then like I'm Jewish, and like people are like, wait, what? How is that possible? Like you're Mexican, you're Jewish? What? Is that possible? Like, oh yeah, like you can be both. And like people are really surprised that that exists. And I had to struggle because like after like I tell people like, hey, like I'm also Jewish, people like, oh, you're Jewish and Mexican, like even like those same like in the Hispanic community, like you're treated different, like, oh, like you're Hispanic, but are you really Hispanic? Like now that you're Jewish, people see you differently. And that was like at the beginning a struggle for me, like to like deal with that, like, okay, yeah, I'm Hispanic, and like I want to have that part of my personality of my with me, but that doesn't mean that I cannot be as Jewish or as Hispanic as other people. So definitely that was a struggle, and something that like, okay, at the beginning I thought like, okay, maybe this won't affect this much, like maybe I don't have to like think about it, like yeah, I just would have accepted I'm Jewish, that's it. And when this incident with Angela Davis came up, like, you know, like this is something I care about, and this is something that affects not only me, but it's affecting other students. Other students are feeling they're not welcome in the community, and that they have to choose a side. They're either Hispanic, they're either one side or the other one, and they have either to choose one. And I think like Bianca mentioned before, like you can be both. Like it doesn't have to be like, oh, you choose one or the other one. At the end, it's your personality, it's your background, and you should be proud of being both of that intersectionality, and you should be comfortable of being yourself. And I think that's something that struggle, but I come to like realize that you can both, you can be both, you can be yourself, and you should be proud to just be, for me, Hispanic and Jewish, and now American. So yeah.
And let me ask both of you about being pro-Israel in those spaces. Have you felt resistance? Has that, and how have you responded to that? Have you addressed it? Have you, you know, basically been reluctant to talk about Israel in these spaces? And have you found allies in those spaces, in progressive spaces, as a Jew and as a Zionist?
I think at first I was really reluctant to talk about my support for Israel or my relationship with Israel. But being part of this Persian diaspora, that they're obviously in the United States for somewhat of a similar reason, you clearly were unhappy with what happened as well, and that's why you're here. I think I've intersectionally, in terms of being marginalized groups, I've experienced a overwhelming support and understanding of experience from the Baha'i community, the Armenian Persian community that have experienced similar struggles from the same background. But honestly, I think the more you talk about it and the more you just normalize the fact that you are part of the Persian diaspora, but you have an indigenous homeland, and that's Israel, is something that is just normalized. You talk about it, and those that are ignorant and unwilling to have a conversation about it, like what Julia was saying, like it's not your responsibility to change someone's mind. Like it's your identity. No one is obligated to indulge in contesting who you are. Like you're not a topic of conversation. It's your identity. But I do feel that Israel, at first I was really scared. I was really paranoid to talk about it. But it kind of just became something normal, and speaking with when I was TFI president, I think Tritons for Israel president, I think I used my Persian identity somewhat as like a facade, that like when I would go to Students for Justice in Palestine meetings and hear what the other side had to say, I would often introduce myself as Persian and not as Jewish or not as Zionist, so that I wouldn't immediately be asked to leave or be looked at in a certain way, so that a conversation could happen. And then they'd be like, oh, okay, cool. She's not like a spy or whatever. And then a conversation would start, they'd get to know me, and then I'd be like, oh, I'm also Jewish. And so unfortunately, like thinking about it, yeah, it's kind of messed up that I had to use that identity as like a facade or pretend I wasn't Jewish by using my Persian identity. But I've kind of used it as like a crutch, and it's kind of been something that's been difficult to grapple with within the Persian community. But overall, I think having these conversations, just normalizing my pro-Israel and Zionist identity, has been the best tool in normalizing my pro-Israel identity.
And Tavo, I don't know what you did, but you are now aglow. Whereas you were in the dark before, you are now, we can see you much more clearly now. So whatever you did, keep it that way. Have you experienced similar, challenges in when Israel has come up in these spaces?
So my experience has been a little bit different. Personally, when I came to college, I was really afraid to talk about Israel. I said, I didn't have that much information about it. I wasn't that knowledgeable about Israel. And definitely my freshman year, Hillel provided me a lot of resources to learn about Israel. We had a bunch of different programming that I got to learn about history, about what's happening today. So I got to grow knowledge. And after I got more involved with board and started to learn more about Israel, I felt more comfortable talking about this topic. Our community, like I said, is a small one. So we don't really have had problems. I personally hadn't had any problems when people come and try to talk to me about Israel or about that. But in the past, our community, every year we put this big event for a whole community on UTSA called Israel Block Party, where it's a day where we put this big event and we teach our community, our students, about Israel, their history, their culture, food, and it's a really big event. And normally during this event, we get about a lot of pushback from these different communities. And it's difficult because we want to have an open conversation, but it's been a struggle to establish communication, and it's always a struggle for us students to be able to talk about Israel on a situation like this. Like I said, personally, I haven't had these conflicts, these situations yet, but I know is something in the future that maybe we'll have to deal. But I feel like because of Hillel, I'm much more prepared and ready to confront any of these situations.
Great. Julia, let me turn to you because you're our resident sort of cross-campus expert. You interact with students from a lot of different campuses, and there are different ways that we can think about anti-Semitism. A lot of times when we think about anti-Semitism, we think of white supremacy and traditional anti-Semitism from the right, to generalize it. We also are seeing a growing anti-Semitism based on Jews' connection to Israel, which again, to overly generalize, seems to be coming more from the left. When you talk to students on other campuses and you do sort of a very unscientific cross-country look, where is the anti-Semitism that Jewish students today are facing? Is it based on their Jewish identity, or is it based on their connection to Israel?
Yeah, we're actually working on putting together a more scientific study of that right now through a survey. If you want to be part of that, Jewish on Campus on Instagram, the link is in our bio. So please feel free to submit your experience. We're happy to always hear. I'll start off by telling you guys a couple of stories that I've heard from students around the country. University of Vermont, LGBTQ plus students at UVM are told not to carry flags or banners with Stars of David at campus pride events because it looked too much like the flag of Israel. At UC Berkeley, students were claimed that the, quote, Jewish-owned media had kept the truth hidden. At Northwestern University, an associate professor of electrical and computer engineering was an active and vocal Holocaust denier. At Tufts University, a student was harassed and bullied on the Student Senate for opposing a referendum which blamed Israel and the ADL for America's extensive history with racism and police brutality. As you can see from these stories, it comes from everywhere. And I think a lot of the problem with our state of fighting anti-Semitism right now is that there's a genuine misunderstanding of what anti-Semitism is. I say this a lot, anti-Semitism is very nebulous, and part of the reason why it's endured for such a long time is because it changes its face, depending on what is the greatest evil in society. And so when it comes to anti-Semitism, it really comes from both places. Jews can be, on the right, victims of fascism, like we saw in the Holocaust. Jews can be blamed for fascism when there are blood libels thrown against Israel. It happens in similar capacities. Lots of the traditional Elders of Zion, Tsarist propaganda that we've seen for the past 200 years can be repurposed. And you see that a lot with blaming Israel for lots of issues like systemic racism, which have been historically true and valid problems that America's had to grapple with throughout all of American history. This scapegoating of Judaism happens on both sides of the aisle. And I think that we'd be remiss to point to one side and say, this is where it all comes from, because it comes from both places. And if we don't keep our eyes open from it, from everywhere, we're putting ourselves at danger to experiencing it and not being able to be armed with the tools to combat it. That's why I think passing IRA, like Bianca said she had done on her campus and that Jewish on Campus works to do at schools around the country, I think is so important, because IRA doesn't actually condemn anything. IRA gives you a guideline for condemnation. IRA tells you what is anti-Semitism, so there's no more guessing, because I think that every group should be able to define what the prejudice against their group is, and the same should be true for the Jewish community. I think that we need to take ownership of what anti-Semitism is, so then people who don't experience it will know how to condemn it, and I think that's a really great tool. So to make a long answer short, I think it comes from everywhere, and we should keep our eyes open for it.
That's really helpful. I want to take some questions that we've been receiving from the chat. If you have a question, please submit it to questions@Tina in the chat, and she will pass them along to me. We've gotten several questions about how do you determine which schools have a track record or history of anti-Semitism or anti-Israel experiences. And how do you vet campuses? And so first and foremost, let me give a plug for the Hillel College Guide and let you all know that it's a great resource for parents and for high school students to learn about the Jewish community on different campuses. And you can also interact with different Hillels and interact with their professionals and their students and learn more about different university experiences and university life. And so let me ask each of you, do you guys have a sense of how to find a campus that has a track record of anti-Semitism or has a problem? Did you do any research before coming to campus? And let me ask, can you, and I think Julia, you mentioned this a little bit, can you have a campus that has anti-Semitism, but also is a great place to be a Jewish student?
I would give a resounding yes to that question. And I think that this is a conversation I've had in particular with students from all over the country. I had mentioned earlier at NYU and Tufts hearing this from students. I think the idea that you can pick a school that has less anti-Semitism and therefore escape it is unfortunately untrue. I think unless you go to an entirely Jewish school, you're probably going to face anti-Semitism at some point, if not in college, in your life. And I think that part of I think that if I, as Julia Jassy, the 18-year-old who had never gone to college before, were put into the workforce where I had to grapple with probably anti-Semitism that I'll probably have to grapple with in certain fields, I wouldn't be prepared. I wouldn't know how to handle it. I wouldn't be ready to confront it. I grew up in an area, Long Island, where there are lots of Jewish people. I grew up in a bubble where I never really had to, as I said earlier, defend the ideas that I held on to so strongly. I think anti-Semitism is never a good thing. It's never something that you want to experience. But I think that at some point in your life, probably it's going to be inevitable. And I think the best thing for you to do isn't to try to necessarily pick a school that you think you won't face it, because you probably will face it anywhere. Of course, go where you're comfortable. Don't go to a school that makes you feel uncomfortable ever. But I think once you find the place that you're going to go to, be prepared, have a strong Jewish community, because I don't think this is anything anyone should ever have to contend with alone. I think having people who you could talk to whenever you hear an offhanded comment in class, like Bianca had mentioned, or like Tavo had mentioned, have someone coming to campus that you want to speak to your friends about having a conversation about their anti-Semitism. I think having that community is essential. And then arming yourself with knowledge is an incredibly empowering tool. So I would urge everyone to have those two pieces, but also to remember that college is more than that, and that you can absolutely have a wonderful college experience without having to let that be the definition of it.
And the best way to address anti-Semitism is to have impassioned, strong Jewish students like the three of you. And so, having students on campuses where there are issues means that we know who will help us address them. We've gotten a bunch of questions about faculty. And I'm curious, Bianca, you talked a little bit about experiencing an issue with a professor who put an end to anti-Semitism in a class. Have any of you experienced anti-Semitism from faculty, and what are the resources available if you experience that, or you hear from others that a professor is anti-Semitic?
Yeah, so I experienced both sides of the coin, I think, and unfortunately that professor I had in my Farsi class was the only one on her side of the coin. My first year, I experienced a lot of anti-Semitism in my general education requirements. So a lot of the courses that I was required to take as per being a UC San Diego student, we were challenged with an assignment to find a problem at UCSD as our final project and fix it. And I wanted to do BDS. I thought BDS was a problem and it was an obstruction to constructive dialogue as what a university is supposed to be, this cathedral of knowledge and exchange of discourse and dialogue. And I thought BDS was just an obstruction to that. And it said,
Let's explain what BDS is real quick.
Yes. Sorry.
Go ahead.
So BDS is the boycott, divestment, and sanction movement against Israel, and it economically aims to debilitate the state of Israel as a facade for supporting Palestinian activism and self-determination, but it's just crippling Israel. And it comes in the forms of academic boycotts as well, by not including Israeli authors or studies, as well as Israeli products. And my campus experiences that as well, especially in the academic way. Thank you for reminding me to explain that acronym. I think when I was in that class, I was told to find a different topic, and no other student was asked to do that. I presented it anyway, and I thought it was fine, and I thought, oh, no more academic anti-Semitism. And then at the end of that year, I had a professor for an ethnic studies class that I was required to take that that dedicated an entire week to Palestine, self-determination, and all of that, and talked about how Jewish indigeneity to the land of Israel was completely doctored, and that Jews had come up with these artifacts that they're finding, and archaeologists are being scammed into producing these artifacts, and it's all just biblical and it's a hoax. And when I went to go speak about it with her in office hours, because I was so appalled by this like blatant denial of history, she had a poster on her wall that said "I heart Hamas," and I was completely just like I went pale. I was my palms were sweating. I was in shock. And so I had a lot of help from Stand With Us and Hillel, and I wrote an op-ed about it, and it was published, and nothing could come of it because anti-Semitism wasn't accurately defined on my campus. And so it was just classified as like offense, and nothing was done from it. I requested that she take classes. Apparently she's not allowed to be forced to take any classes because she has a PhD, and that means she knows everything. So I passed IRA 4 years later, and now there's a precedent for things like that, and denial of Jewish history blatantly is considered anti-Semitism, so that things like that, Bezrat Hashem, don't happen again. So that was my experience.
I'm curious, a lot of the students that are here with us today are going to be talking to Hillel professionals and going to be talking to other students during campus sessions over the next couple of days. What questions do you think students and parents should be asking when they go on college tours, whether they're real or virtual? What should they know ahead of time before they get on campus? What are the questions that you wish you had asked before you chose your school?
I think you always want to be prepared. I think understanding a couple of respects, what that means. Number one is to know that you have a strong support system, so to understand the groups that you have on campus, what if there's a pro, so for example, University of Chicago, we don't have any like pro-Israel group. We have Hillel, which tends to be pro-Israel. We have an Israeli like business group. We don't have any pro-Israel groups. So kind of having that understanding of the terrain. University of Chicago is an interesting case because we have, I think, a very specific campus culture. And I think understanding what your campus culture is really important. One thing I've kind of come to realize speaking to students from all over the country is that every school is different and that there's no blanket rule of what you're going to experience as a student because campus culture is super different. What that means at my school is there's a huge emphasis at Hillel on like Jewish identity and what that means for you. So I'm working with my Hillel rabbi right now to make a class at our school actually about exploring your Jewish identity. And I think that that's one huge facet of Hillel Life. Hillel also has like a scholarship that you can go and you can learn about, which I credit to me being kind of passionate about Jewish life. I was never really super into it. My rabbi convinced me to take a class at Hillel, and now it's all that I do. So I really credit Rabbi Anna for that. But I think on the flip side, understanding if something anti-Semitic should happen to you, where do I go? What are the resources? At some schools, they have like offices of identity and inclusion. For other schools, they have different things. I think understanding right away who you turn to is really important. I had an instance in a class one time when a professor had alluded to the violent decolonization of Israel-Palestine. I was super uncomfortable. That's my family. I don't want to think about anything violent happening to them. So my rabbi told me where I should go to, where I should report the incident to, and guided me through that. She also kept it very real with me. She told me which majors I might have more of an experience with, which helped me to kind of figure out which classes would be best for me, and kind of making the most of my college experience. So I would definitely recommend kind of speaking to the rabbi at your Hillel, speaking to the students at your Hillel, and getting like a true understanding of campus culture and how that impacts life.
Tavo, what questions would you have asked if you could go back and do your college search over again?
I think, like Julia said, like definitely seeing like which resources every school offers, but also get to see like what the community you're going to, like your college is the place you're going to spend the next 4 years of your life. So I think it's very important for you to know the community going into it, what type of resources you want to have, what type of organizations you want to have, kosher food, not kosher food, do you have Hillel, do they have like what type of organizations you are going to have the opportunity to be there. So definitely don't be afraid to ask questions. Ask the question, because right now is the moment to ask the questions. Because once you're there, then it's really difficult to like realize that, oh, I didn't know we would have these resources. So like, oh, I didn't know this school had this. So like, definitely don't be afraid to ask questions. We're here to answer any questions. And like I said, I think it's pretty important, just get to know the community of the school, because at the end is where you're going to spend the 4 years of your life. And it's going to be a very experience if you're in a community that you know that is going to fit your personality and this has the resources that you want for yourself to grow. So yeah.
We're getting a couple of questions about the issue of academic freedom and professors who have sort of carte blanche ability to say or do whatever they want because of academic freedom. How big of an issue is that on campus? Does it allow for anti-Semitic speech to not be responded to? And there's similar questions about whether professors are able to refuse to write letters of recommendation for students and other types of issues like that. Do you see these issues playing out on campus today? Julia, you're nodding.
Well, yes, in particular, because University of Chicago, their whole kind of like trademark thing is academic freedom. So I guess speaking to this is kind of natural to a UC student. Academic freedom means academic freedom for everyone. There should be no point where you feel that a professor is showing bias toward you because you're a Zionist or because of your identity. Academic freedom is not freedom of bigotry, is not freedom of bias, it's freedom from those things. That means that it has to apply evenly to all students, to all faculty. That's the promise. And I think that it's a perversion of what academic freedom really means to use it to silence speech, to use it to say that certain perspectives aren't allowed. If you're from a Jewish background, you can't express that. I think that that's kind of like the tool. So IRA in no way kind of stifles academic freedom because it doesn't actually do anything. It just tells you what anti-Semitism is, so then universities can take action. Universities have a commitment to academic freedom, but they also have a commitment to protecting students. And if you're unsafe in a classroom because your identity is being called into question, that's not protected under academic freedom. So I think that kind of like distinction that academic freedom can never impede on your freedom is really, really important. And if a professor refuses to write your recommendation letter, I wouldn't want one from them anyway. They probably wouldn't write the best one. You should probably find a different one, to be quite frank. But also, I'm sure the university would not allow that if it's just from that background. But it's hard to prove sometimes. That's the reason why.
And I'll say on Hill Internationals, and we do a lot of work educating university administrators and university leadership about academic freedom. And I think Julia gave a very good explanation of it. And our campus climate initiative is focused on helping university administrators understand academic freedom and code of conduct, and how they can use their work and their leadership to prevent anti-Semitism on campus and to create a climate where Jewish students and pro-Israel students feel welcome. And regarding the incident that became a little bit famous a couple of years ago regarding refusal of letters of recommendation, it was Hillel and other organizations that really stepped in and worked with the university to ensure that the professor who refused to write a letter of recommendation was disciplined and that the policy was clarified. And so and that's a really good note to end on, because so often at times it feels that we hear about anti-Semitic incidents on campus, but what we don't hear about is what happens next. And we don't hear about how those issues are addressed by the university, how they're addressed by the Hillel, and how they're addressed by student leaders like the three that we see in front of us today. And I just want to say, Bianca and Julia and Tavo, how much I've enjoyed working with you, and how really honored I am and really thankful I am that you guys are on campus and taking the role that you are, because I think it's so important to ensuring that all Jewish students have a safe and welcoming experience on campus. And that's what Hillel's in the business to do. So I want to thank all of you for your time, and I want to thank everybody for joining this conversation and hearing from these really impressive students. We're happy to continue this conversation and answer questions you may have about anti-Semitism on campuses by, if you want to email hillel@home@hillel.org. And we encourage you to ask questions directly to the campus professionals and the students who you are talking with in the coming days, who can share about the vibrant Jewish life that you don't get to see in the headlines, though we're working really hard to change that. We hope that both the teens and the parents and the guardians will take advantage of opportunities to attend sessions and explore the booths and the chat features available. Tomorrow, Wednesday, will feature sessions from 149 Hillels, representing 239 colleges and universities. Campus sessions will take place during the hours of 4 to 11 p.m. Eastern. And please check the booths of campuses that are of interest to you and add their live sessions to your schedule. We also encourage you to visit the booths of our 17 partner organizations. You can type partner into the search bar. These booths are offering drop-in sessions from 3 to 4 p.m. Eastern tomorrow and Wednesday, and include gap year programs, service fellowships, college prep and financial opportunities, professional development and internships, Jewish Greek life, and Israel travel. I want to send a special thank you to Paula Harlan, to Andy Anderson, and Tina Malka, my wonderful colleagues who helped make this event happen. And if you missed any of the signature sessions this evening, where recorded, they will be available for you in the Hill International booth. Thank you all so much for joining us, and enjoy the college fair.